He asked me to be his fake girlfriend to make his ex jealous, and I thought it would be harmless, a simple favor. But as the night of our last date approached, I realized I couldn't tell whether he wanted revenge or something more. When he looked at me under the soft glow of the city lights, his words stopped my heart. What I thought was a game was about to become so much more. Hello, my friends. I am Olivia, and this is Olivia's Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I had always been careful with my heart, the kind of person who measured every step before committing emotionally. My life was ordinary but comfortable. I worked long hours at the publishing house, kept my apartment just tidy enough to feel like a sanctuary, and had a small circle of friends who were mostly busy with their own lives. Love, to me, had always felt like a dangerous adventure I wasn't ready to take. Then came Mason. I met him at a mutual friends party, the kind of gathering where people smile politely while nursing lukewarm drinks. Mason had this easy charm, the kind that made you forget the mundane surroundings. But beneath his grin, I sensed a subtle mischief, a glint of trouble I usually avoided. He approached me with that half smile, leaning casually against the balcony railing, and asked the strangest thing. Would I pretend to be his girlfriend? To make my ex jealous, he said casually, like he was ordering coffee instead of proposing a lie that would entangle both our lives. I froze. My first instinct was to say no. Fake relationships were messy, unpredictable. But then he explained. His ex had ghosted him after a messy breakup, and he needed closure, a little spark of revenge to remind her he wasn't broken. I told myself it was harmless, that it would be just one evening, a single night of pretense. And somehow, against all my better judgment, I said yes. We agreed to meet the following weekend at a rooftop restaurant that overlooked the skyline like a scattering of stars fallen to earth. That day, I couldn't stop thinking about him, not as a pretend partner, not as a scheme for revenge, but as Mason. There was a tension in the way he texted me, careful, playful, almost vulnerable. A small part of me feared that my heart might betray me before the plan even began. When I arrived, he was already there, looking impossibly real in a crisp white shirt that made his dark eyes seem deeper, more alive. I felt a flutter in my chest, the same nervous excitement I hadn't felt in years. The city hummed beneath us, lights flickering like fireflies, the faint clink of glasses from other tables blending into a background murmur. He stood, brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve, and for a moment I thought this was just a scene we'd laugh about later. But then he stepped closer, his gaze holding mine longer than I expected. "I can't believe this is our last date," he said softly, almost hesitating, and the words landed like a stone in my chest. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, he reached out and took my hand, and suddenly the air between us felt charged, dangerous, impossible. And that's when he looked at me and said, I stared at Mason, my heart thudding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The hand I had so willingly placed in his suddenly felt like a live wire, and I realized I wasn't entirely sure anymore if this was about his ex or about me. I don't know if I should say this, he murmured, voice low, almost drowned out by the hum of the city below. But being here with you, it feels real. My stomach flipped. Real? I had agreed to pretend, to play a part in a story that was never meant to touch our actual lives. And yet, looking at him, at the way the streetlights caught the faint curve of his jaw, the subtle warmth in his eyes, I couldn't deny it. Something was happening, something I hadn't planned for and couldn't stop. We sat, ordered drinks we barely touched, and fell into an easy conversation that blurred the lines between pretense and truth. He laughed at my stories, but not the polite laugh of someone humoring a stranger. He laughed with me, the kind that made your ribs ache and your heart lift at the same time. And I found myself sharing things I hadn't told anyone in years, little fears and hopes that I had tucked away, convinced they were too fragile for the world. Mason listened, really listened. I could feel it in the way he tilted his head, the way he nodded at just the right moments, the way he held my gaze without making it uncomfortable. I told myself it was just acting, that the lines between us were carefully drawn, but my hands tingled where his fingers had brushed mine, and I could feel his warmth like a slow burn. Then came the walk. The rooftop led to a narrow path lined with string lights, twinkling like tiny stars trapped on Earth. Mason offered his arm, and I took it, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. We moved in a rhythm that felt natural, effortless, as if we had been walking together for much longer than an hour. And that's when I noticed a subtle change, a softness in his eyes, a pause in his step, a weight in his hand as he held mine. My pulse spiked, and I knew something was coming, some truth I wasn't ready for but couldn't avoid. "Mason," I began, my voice almost trembling. "What is it? What are you—" Before I could finish, he stopped, turned toward me fully, and the city seemed to hush around us. The lights reflected in his eyes, making them shimmer like the ocean at night. He swallowed, a deliberate, slow movement that made my chest tighten. "I never meant for it to be like this," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I asked you to play a part, but somewhere along the way—" His hand tightened around mine, and I felt a jolt, half anticipation, half fear. "Somewhere along the way," he continued, his gaze locking with mine, I stopped pretending. The words hung between us, heavy and impossibly fragile. My breath caught, my mind raced. I had come expecting a game, a brief chapter in someone else's story. But Mason's confession, it changed everything. And in that moment, standing under the string lights, with the city sprawling beneath us, I realized I had a choice: walk away and pretend none of this mattered, or step into a story I never thought I'd be brave enough to live. He leaned closer, and my heart knew what was coming, but my lips, my voice, and my courage still faltered. I froze, caught between the warmth of his hand and the weight of his words. "You stopped pretending?" I whispered, almost afraid to break the fragile spell. Mason nodded, a small, almost guilty smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he admitted. "I thought it would be fun. One night, one show, and then we'd go back to our normal lives. But being with you, it felt real the moment I saw you smile tonight." My chest tightened. Real? That word carried a danger I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I wanted to believe him, to throw caution to the wind, but a part of me remembered the rules. This was a game. Pretend, nothing more. And yet, here we were, the rules unraveling faster than I could comprehend. We walked in silence for a few steps, the kind of quiet that hums with possibility. I could feel his eyes on me, tracing every line of my face, every subtle shift in expression. And I wanted to turn away, to protect myself from feeling too much, but I didn't. I couldn't. "You don't have to say anything," Mason murmured, his voice low, intimate. I needed you to know." I swallowed hard. I wanted to speak, to tell him that I was scared, that I didn't know if I could step into something so uncertain. But before I could, he shifted closer, his forehead almost brushing mine. The air between us was electric, and suddenly the city below felt distant, irrelevant. It was just him, me, and the impossible pull that had been growing since the moment we met. "Olivia," he said, the name on his lips like a confession, a prayer, a warning. "I didn't expect to feel this way. I didn't plan for you to matter, but you do, more than I can explain." My heart thudded painfully against my ribcage. I could feel the truth of his words vibrating through me, threatening to shatter the careful walls I had built around my heart. I had promised myself I would remain detached, a neutral player in his little scheme. And yet, every instinct screamed that this was no longer a game. And then, just as my mind scrambled to make sense of the moment, Mason did something I hadn't expected. He took a step closer, bridging the final distance between us, and looked directly into my eyes with a seriousness that stole my breath. "I want tonight to be real," he said, voice trembling slightly. "Not for her, not for anyone, just for us. Will you let me?" My chest tightened. My thoughts collided with my heart, which was already leaning dangerously toward yes. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to fall into him and forget the rules, the plans, the world outside this rooftop. But before I could answer, my phone vibrated sharply in my pocket, a jarring reminder of reality. I pulled it out, expecting a trivial message, maybe a reminder from work. Instead, the screen displayed a name that made my blood run cold. It was her, his ex. And in that moment, everything shifted. The rooftop, the lights, the electric pull between us, it all felt like it could crumble in an instant. Mason glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening, and I realized that the game we thought we were playing had just become dangerously real. And that's when he looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and said, Mason's gaze locked onto mine, and I could see the conflict written across his face. His jaw was tight, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve. I knew he hadn't expected this. His carefully planned scheme had been upended by real emotions, and now the past was knocking at our door. "She's here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded slowly, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made my chest ache, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "Yeah, but Olivia, it's not about her. It's about you. It's always been about you." I blinked, trying to process the words. Him. Choosing me over the history that still lingered like a shadow behind him. The city lights reflected in his eyes, turning them into something raw and honest. My heart waged war against my mind. The logical part of me screamed that this was reckless, that it was dangerous to step into the aftermath of someone else's heartbreak. But every fiber of me, every heartbeat, wanted to believe him. Then what do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. He took a deep breath, stepping even closer, until I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "We decide what this really is. Not a game, not a favor. Us, only us, tonight." The words hit me like a wave. I realized in that moment that I hadn't just been his pretend girlfriend. I had been alive in a way I hadn't felt for years, laughed in a way I had forgotten, and cared in a way I never thought I would. And now he was telling me that he felt the same, that the line between pretend and reality had vanished, and what remained was undeniable. I wanted to speak, to explain that I was scared, that my heart was fragile. But as I looked into his eyes, all the fear melted away. The pull between us was magnetic, unstoppable. I reached out and let my fingers intertwine with his, and he smiled, just a small, genuine smile, but it carried the weight of everything unsaid between us. Then he leaned closer, and for a heartbeat, the world disappeared. The city lights, the distant hum of traffic, Even the text from his ex. Nothing existed except this space between us, charged with the electricity of possibility. And finally, softly, he whispered, "I'm done pretending, Olivia. I don't want anyone else, only you." My breath caught, my chest tightened. Every nerve ending in my body screamed, yes, yes, yes. I had come expecting a game, a fleeting night, a favor to someone else. Instead, I found something terrifyingly beautiful, someone willing to see me, to choose me, to make me matter. I feel the same, I admitted, the words trembling but true. I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone. He smiled, relief washing over his features, and then kissed me. Not a pretend kiss, not a staged moment for revenge or spectacle, but real, warm, soft, and all-consuming. And in that kiss, I realized the truth. Sometimes the heart finds its story in the most unexpected ways, in the lies that turn into truths, in the games that lead to love. As we pulled back, the city lights shimmered around us like a promise, and I knew, whatever came next, whatever challenges awaited, we would face it together. Not as a game, not as a favor, but as something real, something ours. And for the first time in years, I felt fearless.